Boom. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome those of you who are... welcome those of you coming over from the other side at good old TikTok. Welcome those who are coming joining. I'm not late again. Lies, Jason, all lies. I am bang on time for a change. Now, see, there you go. This is perfect timing. Anyway, how are we all? Sorry I haven't been on YouTube recently. I've been on the other dark side, the evil platform, because, yeah, it's easier. Yeah, it's not too bad. Anyway, I hope everybody is good. I hope everybody is happy. I was asked a question over on my Discord, and hence the title of this, basically trying to help someone set up an Active Directory system. And I said to them, it's not something that is that easy to explain in short, sharp, simple clips. It's easier to do a start to finish run and show you what, why, when, and how. Hence this live. And it's obviously a lot easier to do this on a platform that is this way. So I thought YouTube, because Twitch is just boring. So yeah, we will be using Windows Server 2022. We will be hosting it on a Hyper-V server. Let me just make sure the server is happy, because it's my current speed testing client server, and I was planning on getting a load of virtual clients installed on it. So I will get that underway now. That's fine. It's got the wrong name on it at the moment, but that's okay. And I have no idea how much disk space is in this server, so that might be a laugh. We might have to do some maintenance work on the server, because I forgot to look at that. Yeah, we'll squeeze it on there for the time being. That shouldn't be a problem. We should be able to squeeze that in there. So let's flick you guys over to... Yeah. Did I do anything in there? No, that's all fine. Stick that there for the time being, get that copying off of there. And before we get under there, just standard YouTube live stream start as well. Jason, you will be happy. Well, I don't know, actually. You might be happy, obviously, as you know. I have my Autolabs APs / I'd class them probably more akin to what you need over there, as a hand warmer most of the time. I mean, they get damn hot. I do, it's just not plugged in. I have some disks I can throw into the server. They are. I'm not going to deny, they are a nice AP. Would I pick an Autolabs AP for business over a Unify AP? Not at the moment. That's the God's honest truth. If someone wanted a simple setup for their house or for a small office for themselves, fine. Absolutely fine. I have some concerns. I have some issues, which I will do a video on over them. Obviously, it's just, oh, shut up, you. I have, my concerns are purely and simply through, there's some interesting ideas. Yes, but that's because for some reason you refuse to accept that that there are that Unify actually does do what it's supposed to do most of 99.9% of the time. And the 0.1% of the time where people have problems, they shout and scream so loud. Now we get the TikTok YouTube people battle in the comments. Right, that's fine. Right, let's switch you guys over to here. Evening, Mike. Welcome, welcome. We're on for the long haul tonight. Jason would never use it, but if you don't already, go and subscribe to Jason. Obviously, with him, unfortunately, being over the other side of the pond, he has access to different things than I do. But in the world of IT, that's why we exist, to have difference of opinions. We're both right and we're both wrong. Right, let's build a quick Hyper-V setup. New virtual switch. Create virtual switch. In fact, what network cables have I got plugged in here at the moment? Lies. Lies. We could always use Cisco, but that would just be silly. No one would want to do that. Right, are you awake? Are you plugged in? Yes, you are. It's fine. Right, what network are you on? You're going to behave? You're going to give me an IP? There we go. Right. It's all right. I might need to... That's fine, that's fine. It's all right. This is a kind of a quick leverage what I've got fired up at the moment thing. Right. I think it's you, the live one at the moment. Which 10 gig card is live? Let's find out quickly. I forgot to look. Number 2. So probably kick me off this server for a second. And I will probably have to make sure it's behaving because it's only there. Yeah, that's kicked me off. Be gone. Wait for that to kick in. Yes, because it's actually behind another firewall, and I haven't got all the firewall rules set up. So I'm not gonna... I'd have to create a ton of firewall rules. So I might as well use Splashtop. This is the problem. I'm on my machine here, which is on a different network to that server, which is on the speed testing network, behind another Sophos. Yeah. AnyDesk, no, because I can't get it to go properly. AnyDesk doesn't work through a SSL inspecting firewall because they won't tell you what servers they use. And they don't give you exclusions you can put in with Sophos. So, no. Whereas Splashtop is quite simple to get through safely working through a firewall. Yeah, if you put AnyDesk behind a SSL inspecting packet firewall, it breaks. It just doesn't work. So, right. Okay, new virtual machine. We are going to call this test DC1. It can live there for the time being. I'm not fussed about where it lives. Gen 2 machine. We'll give it some dynamic memory. Stick it on the switch. Yeah, that's fine. Install from an ISO, which is tucked in here. There it is. Finish. Rustdesk I need to have a look at. Rustdesk is something that I want to test at some point. So Jim, what's it? There's a, I don't know what it is. There's a funky little, oh, I can heart things in chat. That's why. What's a DC? DC, domain controller. So not, I keep wanting to say Azure Active. It's not. So Active Directory domain controller, the main server that holds and controls and lists and deals with the authentication in an Active Directory environment is the domain controller. It stores the Active Directory, which is obviously the directory of users, computers, system roles, and everything else. Not data center. It's a yes. Right. Let's give ourselves. I'm whopping two cores. We've got some dynamic memory because Hyper-V and dynamic memory works quite nicely if you're running things like that. Secure boot. Yeah, why not? Right. Boot. At some point, I will build a deployment toolkit server, maybe WDS deployment server, and I'll be able to just spin these up quite easily. But no, you don't need a TPM for 2022. I'll go with standard with a desktop experience. Custom, you install, and away we go. Right, we'll let that install for a second. Yeah, weirdly, it's like, yeah, you could, I could have done, yeah, you can do an unattended install, but what I will probably get set up at some point in the future is either an MDT and WDS server to do an unattended install, which is quite useful if you're deploying a lot of VMs, but it doesn't take 5 seconds to whiz through a server install nowadays. Gone are the days having to get floppy disks out for RAID drivers to pick up the controller. With Windows 10, second display freezing on videos until I click. I have seen that. It will be a graphics driver issue. I was sat thinking, actually, yeah, that is a graphics driver issue. I have seen it in the past. Then the OS on CDs. Yes. I have a server sat down there that is an old IBM. And the other thing I need to, as I think I mentioned to people in the past, I need to get hold of a set of EBS installation disks, which was SBS's bigger and tougher and meaner brother. Endpoint, is that endpoint configuration manager? Yeah. It's for a duplex, so he was a 10th gen seller on CPU and onboard graphics. Feel free to hammer the like if you like. Likes are fun. Likes are good. All the likes, all of the time. But thank you all. Right, let's see. Come on, let's go in. Right. No worries, well, we'll be here for a while. Honestly, just change the CPU. If it's using the if it's using the onboard graphics, stick an i3 in there. I mean, a 10th gen i3 is perfectly powerful enough for most general tasks. It's still more powerful than anything like an 11th gen server, 10th gen, 11th gen i3. Yeah, there's nothing. I say the biggest limitation of the i3, unfortunately, is core count. So if you're using it in a server and you're using it for a virtual server, it's just suffers from a lack of cores. The 11th, the 12th, 13th gen i3s absolutely stonk along. Thank you for all the hearts and likes. I can see them going, boo! At some point, I will probably actually invest in some better streaming software for this, but I don't stream enough on YouTube yet. I don't have enough time to stream a lot on YouTube at the moment. Hence why I'm usually on TikTok, because it's a bit easier. But let's just make sure. Flip my kitchen short. Team red or team blue all the time. Team blue every time. Right. The problem is it's never the CPU. It's never the CPU that's the problem. It's always the system that's around the CPU. So whenever you will always see the argument that, oh, AMD is better value. And the reason they're always better value is, yes, while the CPU is a bit cheaper, everything around them is also a little bit cheaper. And you also get, every time someone's saying, I've got this really weird issue, or this doesn't work right, or it does this. And the first question I will always ask is, what CPU? And 9 times out of 10, it will be an AMD. Now, I know there's going to be people that will go, but I have no issues. I have no problems with AMD. Fine. But historically, in 20 plus years of building, maintaining, and supporting systems, the most bizarre and most quirky and most frustrating issues are on AMD-based systems. And they're either fixed by BIOS updates, or they're fixed by changing out certain components, or they're fixed by having to spend a lot more money on better quality components, to the point at which you don't get these problems with the Intel systems. Yeah, Intel for business, if you just want it to work. It's that sort of thing. I know I can build an Intel-based system, and it will run quite happily for 5 to 10 years without causing any issues. I can't honestly, hand on heart, say I would trust an AMD-based system to do the same. Yes, I mean, as I say, servers, Intel. I want to get hold of an EPYC system because they're coming down in price. The early EPYC systems are coming down in price. I wouldn't mind getting hold of one or two just to play with, just to see. The last AMD servers, obviously, were the Opterons, and they were woefully underpowered for what they were. They were a nightmare to deal with because, again, it wasn't the CPUs, it was everything around them. And that's the problem. Yeah. Intel CPU, NVIDIA GPU. It's the one thing that is always missed when you see benchmarks and things like that. Oh my god, it's so fast. This CPU is so fast, this GPU is so fast. Yes, but is it going to be stable for 3 years? And none of them ever go into the historic stuff and the yes it is or no it's not, or oh, it doesn't quite work with this game and things like that. Oh, Citrix on an Opteron. Again, it's the Opterons were sold because of the core count. They were horrendous to use, but the core count was what was important. They had more cores. What should you script in Python? I have no idea. I've never scripted in Python. Right. Let's make a password up. Being a DC, that password is only ever going to be needed for directory services restore mode if you have a serious problem. Can't say. If anyone catches when we are live gaming, one of the people that I game with works for Citrix. Trying to sell 10th gen, but it's a HP. Oh dear. Right, let's press the magic button. Yeah. Oh, so it's a 12-volt PSU. Again, that's as someone who remembers the time. Well, I was building PCs during the 8080X switchover. That was always fun when you had systems coming in with 80 power supplies, and then someone bring something in with a custom, as it were, AT connector and all sorts of weird stuff that used to exist. And then you had the likes of Dell back then with their own weird and wonderful stuff. Right. Let's make sure this boots up and behaves. Intel slot ones. Yeah, slot one Celerons. If you can find a genuine new or a slot one, they're worth a bit to collectors because they were atrocious, but they were hilarious. It's like, we'll take a Pentium 2 and we'll just lop the cache off. Try managing servers with Windows Admin Center. Not today, thank you. Wait for it to finish catching up with everything. Windows Admin Center is okay. Right. For those of you who are installing 2022 for the first time, I don't know why, but it always sets the time zone wrong. London, 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 London. There we go. That's better. Right. Okay. First things first. If you have never set up a domain controller before with Windows for Active Directory, priorities. Name it correctly off the cuff. Saves a lot of aggro later on. Static IP addresses are essential. DHCP on Active Directory causes no end of issues. It's adding the Azure, as in Azure AD Sync. Ah, yes, Jason, but I'm in the country that where the time begins. Haha. So let's start with the name. Let's give it a sensible name. So we're going to call this Lab Domain Controller 1. Even though I've called it Test DC1 up there. So we'll call it Lab DC1. And we go OK. And that's going to want to reboot as well. So we'll let that... We'll restart later on that. And we are going to want to assign a static IP. And what IP range am I on at the moment? Ten 0.120.10. So I am going to give this an IP address of 10.0.120.2 for the time being, because that's outside the DHCP range. Nope. 2.255. Give it the right subnet. Set the gateway. And currently the DNS will be the gateway. Oh, restart required. Let me restart my phone. I've just named mine with the cat's name, just easy. It is until you're dealing with scale. Server naming conventions. There are, I don't know how many servers out there called Apollo, Saturn, Uranus, Thor, Jupiter. Let's restart that. Which are great. But when you're managing a server estate, and that server estate has a lot of servers, and it's managed by multiple people when you have an IT turnover, trying to explain to someone that Saturn is the print server, and Apollo is the email server, and things like that, when having a server naming convention of, like, company or site, role, number in that role, so you can have multiple DCs, so you'll have, for example, like we've got there, lab, because it's in the lab, DC, domain controller, 1. And then if I want a second one, lab, DC, 2. And you can obviously name accordingly. It's why when you look at a lot of cloud-hosted servers, they will list not only where they are, usually obviously that they're cloud-hosted, they'll be in a region, they'll be in a data center, they'll be in a specific, potentially even a specific part of the data center, and so on and so forth. But it's worth getting used to naming conventions like that for when you do start naming servers in a production environment. Yeah, please don't name servers just simple, silly names that don't explain anything about the server in production, because when someone has to come in and start fault finding, and you're telling them, oh yes, that role is on Jupiter, it's like, why is it not on a server called print? Because it's the print role and things like that. So there are reasons why we do that. As I say, the amount of times you see the when you're routing through things, or you're doing a trace, packet trace, and it routes through a server called Apollo or Thor and things like that, it's just like, why? Yeah, site, role, virtual physical, yeah. Again, there are having a server naming structure, and a server naming structure agreed in a company. It doesn't have to be the same across every company. We look after multiple companies. Multiple companies have different server naming structures, but the server naming structures are based upon where the server is and what the server's role is. Right, so for Active Directory, quite simply, now we have set our fixed IP, we can go and add the features. So we've got lab DC1, we've got its address, we know it's a Windows Server 2000, we know that one. You can obviously, if you are deploying this on multiple servers using the GUI, you can select multiple servers to do this to. And we want Active Directory, domain services, and we're going to add all the features. We don't need anything else from there at the moment. By default, we'll come back to that, it will actually install DNS, or it should actually install DNS. Obviously, being Microsoft, they're going to ask you, maybe you should look at Azure Active Directory. Or have they taken that away in 2022? They might have taken it away, but it should install DNS. So we'll let that install a minute, because Active Directory really does need DNS to work properly. Yeah, if they've taken it away, I'll just install it afterwards. The other thing we will be installing on this server, just because this is a run-through, is DHCP as well. Having DHCP running, you don't have to run it on the DC. You may prefer to run it off the DC, but having DHCP integrated into Active Directory means that DNS works a lot better. Info blocks for DNS, split roles. I mean, you way back when, obviously, if you've got a big enough Active Directory environment, there are 5 key roles with Active Directory. So when you install Active Directory, the first server you build in an Active Directory holds the 5 key, they're called FSMO roles, and I can never remember what FSMO means, but you have the schema administrator, you have the password identifier, you have, I've got to remember all the roles now. Schema, password. Oh God, I'm struggling to remember them. I just know there's 5 of them, but it's one of those things that I can't roll off the top of my tongue. Let me just engage the power of Google. Flexible single master operation roles, FSMO. So so we've got schema master, domain naming master, PDC emulator, which is primary domain controller emulator, which harks back to the old domain days of having a primary and a backup domain controller. RID master and infrastructure master. So just quoting from Microsoft here. But each role has a use within, infra naming, RID, PDC, and schema. But basically each role does something quite vital within There we go. It's configured. Did it install DNS? That's new. In previous versions of this, it used to, I say this, it used to install DNS as part of Active Directory. They've obviously dropped that requirement, which is fine. We will go back in and re-add those roles a minute. This is the fun of doing things live. So you find out new things. So we want DNS, add, and while we're here, we're going to have DHCP. Because these two are quite useful. If you're setting out with a new Active Directory, they're quite useful to have on a small Active Directory. Right, just like that. Install. Oh yeah, they'd rather, yeah. That is one thing that Microsoft want to push everything into PowerShell. It's the same if you unfortunately have the displeasure of managing Exchange locally. They've moved a lot of previously GUI features into PowerShell and taken them away from the GUI. Which is unfortunate. If I'd used 2019, as I say, I don't often now set up Active Directory because of Azure Active Directory now. So let me just quickly whiz through. So Schema Master FSMA role holder is the DC responsible for performing updates into the directory schema. Again, the FSMA roles, there is only one role per Active Directory forest, and that's obviously the top level of obviously Active Directory can be massive in some big companies. I mean, genuinely, it can be a humongous system with lots of domains in a forest that enables you to deal with multiple companies, multiple branches of companies, and establishing trust between different parts of the company. I think you asked me that question a while back. Backing up 2 VMs hosted on Oracle Cloud to a local hard disk drive easily. There is no easy way to do that because that requires egress out of the cloud system. You need to back it up to something where you have a link. If you have established a network link from your cloud environment to your on-premise environment, then you could in theory use something like Veeam. That in itself would allow you to do it. So Veeam agent installed on will do it. Right. Once you've installed roles, you will get a nice exclamation mark, and we can press the button that says promote server to be a domain controller, and we want to add a new forest. So you have a forest at the top, a domain under the forest. It's been so long since I've had this honor because normally I'm going into things. So we are going to create a root domain name, and I am going to call this domain name JimTheITGuy.com. And for some reason, I have caps lock on. There we go. Now, when you set up your domain, once you have set this, it's very difficult to change, if nigh on impossible. back when I first started doing Active Directory, which was Server 2000 when it was introduced, the recommendation back then, ironically, was to use a fully qualified domain name that you owned. So there are still in existence a lot of Active Directories set up to domain.com, because that was the default domain set up by Small Business 2000. So if you do come across a domain.com Active Directory, it will have originated back in the good old days of Small Business 2000. Then in Small Business 2003 and Server 2003, Microsoft recommended that you used the .local domain, which was easy. Unfortunately, that caused certification problems later on when they removed the ability to generate certificates for the .local domains. And the advisory was changed then back to use a fully qualified domain that you own. So there are some domains and some Active Directory domains out there that are set up to domains that the company do not own, which causes problems when you try and look up like www. So when you're resolving DNS to that domain, it doesn't work. So yes, pick a domain that you own, because it's quite useful, or pick a domain that you own that you don't have anything published on. So for example, if I was using jimtheitguy.net or .co.uk, or you can use things like that don't exist. So yeah, .internal. The problem with .internal is if you ever wanted to put a address with a signed SSL certificate on, you have to then set up additional UPNs in the system. So there are pros and cons to it, but generally, if you pick a domain that you own, preferably one that doesn't have anything like that you would want to access externally, maybe, because then you end up with DNS not issues. You have to have different DNS records internally to externally. But that is one of the key parts to it. So yes, when you're setting up a forest, start with something that you already know. Domain function level, go for the highest that's available. So these are 2016, which is the highest level currently. This server, there we go, will have DNS servers. I think that's when it does actually install DNS. This server will also be a global catalog, which means it has a full copy of the Active Directory on it. If you have set up a server as an Active Directory server, it does not have to be a global catalog, which means it does not store a full copy of the Active Directory on it. The other option is a read-only domain controller, which you would, for example, have in remote locations where if anyone got onto it, you can't make any changes, or if anyone asked it to make any changes, it cannot make any changes on its own. The domain controller and the Active Directory within that domain controller are read-only and can only be updated or modified by a global catalog domain controller, as far as I remember. Directory services restore mode password. Make sure you keep a note of this password. When you set this password, this is becomes the local administrative password for your Active Directory server. If you have problems with Active Directory and your Active Directory suffers a corruption or goes down, you will need this password. You will need to know what this password is to access restore mode, because this is effectively the local password for the server. I'm going to set something that doesn't really matter because I will probably end up wiping this server out later on, but set a password, make sure you store that in your password management system. Generally, you will always get that a delegation for this DNS server cannot be created because the authoritative parent zone cannot be found, primarily because the authoritative parent zone is obviously in the internet. If I go show more, if you're integrating with an existing DNS infrastructure, you should manually create a delegation to this DNS server in the parent zone to ensure reliable name resolution, which means that you need to point external DNS servers to your DNS server for your ID domain. Generally, you can just go next. No worries, come back whenever, we'll still probably be here. Harking back to the days of NetBIOS, the NetBIOS domain will exist, unfortunately. Get rid of that. Again, it is used by Windows to look things up. Obviously, this will fit. There's the standard limitation, I think it's 16 characters for a NetBIOS name. Might be 12. Can't remember off the top of my head. But it will shorten whatever you've put in there. We'll go next. If you are dealing with a very large Active Directory, back in the day, you might want to put certain different parts of your Active Directory on different storage. Generally, unless there is a really good reason to now, you don't. But you might want to, for example, split your Active Directory database onto different storage, your logs onto different storage, and your sys file onto different storage, because your sys file might be rather large because it's an old one if you're adding, for example, if you're adding this into an existing infrastructure. But to get started, just leave them well alone. And then finally we get the options and the overview at the end, so it tells you what you've put in: domain, NetBIOS name, server function level, domain forest function level, domain function level, global catalog yes, DNS server yes, create, goes through, sets up all the stuff, and we go next. And it will verify that everything is happy. It will give you a few warnings. So we've got here domain controllers with a default security setting named allow cryptographic algorithms with NT4, prevents weaker ones, that's fine. Delegation cannot be prerequisites check, that's fine. And we go install. And off it goes. And we'll let that install for a bit. So while it's doing that, that's going to go off, install all the little bits that it needs. And then it will, here, you will see it will start to create the partitions of the directory for Active Directory. If you were adding this into an existing Active Directory infrastructure, what this would do is it would now start replicating all the information off of another Active Directory server. Securing everything down, obviously it's adding in all the security permissions that lock the domain controller down to be only accessible by users, well, ideally administrators on the domain. DNS is configuring. What this should also do, from memory, it's been a while since I set up AD, so I haven't run through this beforehand, so what this will also do is it will also put the primary DNS server for this server to be the loopback address of 127.0.0.1 for itself, as obviously it cannot look up, it needs the ability to look up the Active Directory domain controller on logon, and generally it will look at itself first. And if you had an environment where you have multiple DCs, I would need to double check this, but my recommended way is if you have DCs that are remote, you would set the DC to look at itself first, and you would set it to look at an off-site DC second. That way, if it has a problem with the local Active Directory, it can still authenticate against an off-site Active Directory server. The same rule will also apply to other servers that are potentially mission critical. The Hyper-V host this is running on is not domain joined. Some environments have Hyper-V, that is, where the hosts are domain joined. If you have an environment where your Active Directory is inside your Hyper-V, you will want your Hyper-V hosts to be able to talk to an Active Directory server that is not inside itself. So if you would want to run multiple domain controllers at multiple sites, and your hosts would talk to the local AD first, obviously, but they would talk to the offsite AD as well. That has caught many a person out when their Hyper-V server fails to boot, because it cannot fire up the VMs to authenticate against. Microsoft have done a good job of fixing that. They fixed that in server 2012, actually R2, I believe, where it would still log in okay, but there are some quirks with it, just so you are aware. But that is why you would set your system to look at a local domain controller and an off-site domain controller where possible. It means that if you are having problems with Active Directory controllers, the rest of your infrastructure remains viable and is able to talk to a domain controller somewhere. Going back quickly to FSMA roles, while I remember this, if you are in a big Active Directory environment with lots of with thousands of potentially thousands of users, so hundreds of thousands of users up, you will probably want to split your FSMA roles across multiple servers to balance the load, because when you get to a certain level, that level of load on one server becomes unsustainable, and it also becomes a single point of failure. So you will probably end up with multiple domain controllers in one site, or potentially multiple domain controllers around the world, having an individual FSMA role on them to prevent when one site goes down, that it taking down all the critical roles for Active Directory to work. So there are many things, but again, if you're just getting started with Active Directory, keep it simple, stupid. Keep it all on one for the time being. Get your Active Directory up and running. Add in a second controller. Generally, as a rule, you should always want 2 AD controllers, purely and simply because if one has a problem, you have another one to fall back to, and you can force Active Directory controllers to seize FSMA roles if there's a problem. So you can actually enforce that Active Directory controller takes over all the primary roles in the domain. If, for example, your primary domain controller goes down and crashes to such a level that it is unrecoverable. Right. Now, first thing you will notice on this logon, we now have Jim the IT Guy / administrator, which is myself. I cannot log into this server without logging into the domain Jim the IT Guy. Being a domain controller, there is effectively no local administrative account now. The administrative account that is local is for directory services restore mode only. It will have taken the local administrative password you set and assigned that to be the administrator password for the domain if this is a fresh setup. So that's me signing in with the exact same username and password previously. So that will be your password. if you have used a temporary password for your administrative password when you first set up, the first thing you will want to do is go in and change that to your correct password. Wait for it to finish catching up. But if we go in and configure this local server, we will now see that we have the correct name. We also have a correct domain now instead of workgroup. And if we go and look at our network connection, what we should have in here is it has changed the preferred DNS server to itself. Now, first step is we have a look at Active Directory users and computers. Now, this is where you spend the most time when you're dealing with Active Directory. So, we have got the forest at the top, and the domain name is Jim the IT Guy. We don't need to worry about anything else. If we check the operations masters, you can see here's 3 of the FSMO roles we talked about earlier: RID, PDC, infrastructure. They're all on this one now. But if we go and look into the domain Jim the IT Guy, we will see that we have the default user setup. So we have the administrator user is set up, which is the user we're logged in as at the moment. We have the guest user, which by default is disabled and should be disabled. In all honesty, you shouldn't ever need to use that. It was put in there just more of a legacy thing now. If we check computers, there will be nothing in there because we have no computers joined to our domain. If we look under domain controllers, we will see there is our lab DC1, and it is a global catalog, and its location is in the site default first site name, which we'll get to the Active Directory sites shortly. We've got security principles, we've got managed service accounts, which are both empty because it's default, and we have the built-in roles or security groups, which, let's see if we can come here. There we go. Which give you a rough starting point for your domain. Generally, if you are just starting off, you will be making use of the users group and probably the administrators group. Where is we go in and have a look at users, you will see there are there we go, sorry. You will see that the administrator is a member of quite a few different groups. He's a member of the administrators group, which is the local administrators group. He's also a member of the domain admins group, which means he has domain admin privileges. He's a member of the domain users group, which means he can log on to the domain. He's a member of the enterprise admins group, which means from memory that group can manage the domain itself. And I believe enterprise admins can manage the site. I have to have a double check on that. And then you've got the schema admins, which means that I can't remember which way around this is. I do apologize. It's either the schema admin can add more additional domain controllers in, or that the enterprise admin can add more additional, one or two. But generally, that is a default administrator setup. In a big environment, you would be splitting administrator roles down. There would be a higher level administrator that is a schema admin and an enterprise admin. But for getting started, it's a good place to start. So the first thing I'm going to do, however, is to create a new, what is called an organizational unit. So we're going to go up and we're going to go new and we're going to go organizational unit, which is, to all intents and purposes, a folder that will be created within your Active Directory domain. And I'm going to call this Test Lab. You can protect the container from accidental deletion, which means that if it stops someone right-clicking and deleting the domain or the actual organizational unit, the amount of times that's happened, and people come crying because they've lost an entire domain. And you will see we now have a nice organizational unit. And under that organizational unit, I'm going to create a couple more. One of them is going to be called users. One of them is going to be called servers. One of them is also going to be called computers. And we're also going to have a security. Oh, in fact, we'll just go with groups for the time being. Groups. Now, putting these down here out the way allows us to start to build a structure for your Active Directory. The default folders are there to get you started, but you don't want to be using them long term, because what you will find with a domain, especially in a big company, is it can grow and grow, and you may find that actually one organizational unit may not be right for every part of the business. You may find that you end up creating multiple top-level organizational units for different areas, for different countries, for different parts and different names and different segmentations of the business. It is up to you. There is no real right way to do it, but leveraging the default folders will lead you to have some fun. Now we have created all of that. Let's just make sure, yeah, these should all be empty, which they are. So under users, you, for example, might want to create another OU, and we'll call this one admin. Why is it put caps lock on? And under admins, I'm going to create a new user, Jim admin. And login name will be jim.admin. And we'll use the super top secret password. And when you set up a new user with Active Directory, you get the default options. So by default, what you should do is set a temporary password. Tick the box that says the user must change the password at next logon. If you leave the user cannot change password ticked, I do not recommend doing that except for specific accounts where it's required. The same with password never expires. Your password with Active Directory should have a reasonable password expiry on it, unless you have it being monitored by a third-party service. One thing Active Directory does not have by default is the ability to detect low-quality passwords. You can enforce a degree of complexity, which we will go into in group policy, but passwords by default with Active Directory should expire usually once, if not twice a year. So that will depend on your company settings. Account is disabled means that you can set an account up ready for someone, but make sure that it is disabled so it cannot be used until you enable it. So we will go next, and we will go finish. And there is my user for my administrative account for me created, but obviously that user has only the basic permissions. He is only a member of domain users, which means that he can sign into the domain, but do nothing more. So I am going to go in, and I am going to make myself a domain admin, which is pretty simple. I'm not going to make myself, however, a schema admin, an enterprise admin. I suppose there is that is it. That is what I need. that is the roles that that user needs. So I can now sign out effectively and sign into this computer as myself. So I am going to sign out. I would pass it through, but it causes some weirdness with because I have how I'm writing. So username jim.admin. Super top secret password. And I will now sign in with a lower role. So whilst I can administer the domain, I cannot make changes that involve, for example, adding a new domain controller under this account. Getting started with things to do with basically role-based access means that you are working to the least privilege principle. So you have an account that has only the permissions it needs to do what it needs to do and no more, which means that you cannot do things and you cannot put the system at risk if you wanted to try and do something that you do not have permission to do. So we are up. One thing that is always worth turning on, so if we go up here, let's wait for it to catch up. Hidden away, and this is something in the Active Directory Administrative Center, is a very useful thing. This is a must-have. If you are dealing with any form of Active Directory, it's always worth checking this. Where is the option? Where is it gone? So if we go into here, we want to... So if you go into the actual domain, you want to enable the recycle bin. This has saved countless IT administrators' backsides over the years. So the first thing you will want to do is enable the recycle bin. This will mean that when you delete something, it will move it to the lost and found container, which is now in there. And it will keep it there. Which means that if you accidentally delete a user, or a computer, or a role, or a security permission within Active Directory, you can recover it. And that has saved a lot of behinds. So we can now come out of that. I'll minimize that down. The next step, getting you started. Getting clients to log in. So getting clients to find your server, your Active Directory on a network. This is why I do recommend using the Windows DHCP server. There's the option. So first thing we want to do is authorize the server. Because you can link DHCP into effectively Active Directory to ensure that DNS works correctly. Is it going to pop up with what I want? There we go. You will need to authorize the server to work. You will then need to go in and enable DHCP name protection. Which means that once we create a new scope, call this lab scope, and 10.0, no block please, 10.0.120. Let's start at 100. And we'll go 10.0.120.250. And we want a /24 subnet mask. And we will go next. I don't need to exclude any IPs at the moment. If you're dealing with a large network with a high throughput of computers and wireless devices, generally you will probably want to set your DHCP lease time to about 8 hours, which is a working day. We will want to configure a couple of additional options. So we want the router gateway 10.0.120.1. Now, making sure that the domain is correct in there will help, because that means that when a client or a server looks up a device's domain, it will look it up by the fully qualified domain rather than looking up its short domain or short name, which can cause problems. And you can already see it has already pre-populated its local domain, but you would make sure that there is at least 2 Active Directory servers generally in there, so that a client can always talk to a domain server, which means that it can always authenticate itself. Win servers, which is the Windows Internet Naming Service, generally, unless you have a very specific situation, you don't use. And then we want to activate the scope. And it will probably have a moan because there is a DHCP server running on my firewall. But, hey ho. So, once that is up and running, I will need to go in and turn the DHCP off on my firewall for a minute. Just sign in to this. Can you do some Access tutorial? I don't use Microsoft Access. I haven't used Microsoft Access for a very long time. Turn that off for now. Now, while that's going ahead, let's quickly make a member server or a client. Generation 2, dynamic memory, connection connected to the same virtual switch. That's fine. Install an operating system from that. Finish. See, if I was organised, I would have done all of this ready, but I'm not, so hence we're doing it live. Connect. Turn it on. Click, press. We'll just let this install for a minute. Accept. Custom. That. Go. Right, I'll minimize that down for a minute. And let's switch back over to the DC. So when that catches up with itself, close that for the minute. What we will see is it appear in here. While that's doing that, we will go into the administrative part and we will go into DNS. Now within DNS, this again, we will see we have our forward lookup zones, which we will have the lookup zones for Jim the IT guy and MSDCS, which is Microsoft Domain something Services, I believe, which is part again of Active Directory, and it lists the domain controllers, the domains, the global controllers, and the primary domain controllers, or the services that has that. We have got our lab listed under the forward lookup zone with its IP address so that it can resolve. We will get some more in there. We've got our reverse lookup zones, which we have nothing in there at the moment. But if we add a new zone in there so that we can do reverse DNS, this will be a primary zone. This wants to be replicated to all domain controllers with where is it? So to all DNS servers running on domain controllers in the domain. Yeah, we don't need it in the forest. We just need the domain. IPv4 reverse lookup. And in here, you type in the start of your IP address range. So this is 10.0.120. And you'll see that we get the actual reverse lookup zone name generated for us there. We want to only allow secure dynamic updates, which means that reverse lookups are updated by authenticated endpoints only. And we will see that we will start to very slowly populate that over a time with the reverse lookups, should you have to do that, which occasionally you do. One thing you will also probably have to set up are some forwarders. As a rule of thumb, you will want to either look up, your first forwarder will want to be your local gateway, if that is doing any DNS resolution for you, especially if it's doing DNS filtering for you. That means that a client will talk to the DNS server on your Active Directory hosts first. It will then, the Active Directory host will then go and talk to the gateway for a DNS resolution if it cannot resolve it itself. What you can, however, do if you are using external DNS servers, for example, I can put in 8.8.8.8 and it will know that that is Google's DNS servers. Same if I put in 1.1.1.1, that will go off and look at 1.1.1.1, which is Cloudflare, and 9.9.9.9.9, which is Quad 9. So you can get it to look up external DNS servers for resolution there, should you require it. Not much more you generally need to do in DNS, unless you are cleaning up a broken domain, but that's more than we need to go through here. Let's see how well our server is doing. That's booting itself up quite nicely. What we should see in a second, if we go into DHCP and refresh, there is our server that is booting. We've got an 8-hour lease on it, so that expires at something to 3 this morning. And what we should also get, if we look in the forward lookup zone for there, if I refresh, nothing yet. We will get an entry in there shortly for that machine. Maybe I need to domain join it first. Probably do. That might be why. But there we go. Let's get a onto that machine quickly. Still going, still booting. Well, we'll let that carry on. Oh, have I kicked myself in that? There we go. Minimize you down, bring you back up. One of the, let's close all that down. The other part, obviously, Active Directory is designed to scale, and it is designed to scale up a lot. Hold on, let me just multitask. Sorry, multitasking. Active Directory, to enable it to work over multiple sites efficiently, what it tries to do is keep domain traffic confined to the sites that you are in. The way you define sites is generally via subnet. So this is Active Directory sites and services. You can see we have the default first name site here. It calls it that by default. If I go in and check the properties, you will see that there's not much actually in here. I can rename that to Test Lab Loft. Oh, sorry. No spaces. Test Lab Loft. But if, for example, you were running over multiple sites, you would make sure that you go and add a new site, and we shall call this. So, for example, I could add in a Test Lab Office. By default, you can select the inter-site links. I won't go into this, but this is down to what links and how sites are linked. And what you would also do is assign subnets to each site. So the subnet for this site is 10.0.120.0/24, and that is the test lab in the office, the loft, sorry. And if I went in and added, for example, a new site in the office, we would add a 10.0.121.0/24 subnet, and we put that in the office. What that means is that if a client PC is communicating using one of those subnets, it will be directed to a domain controller in a site within that subnet. So if you are communicating from the 120 range, so 10.0.120, it will direct you to lab DC1. If you are communicating from the 10.0.121 range and there was another domain controller in the lab site, it would direct the traffic to that site. It's Microsoft's way of trying to keep network traffic fairly local. It's not perfect. You will find that sometimes it just does some strange stuff. There's no easy way to put it. It comes down to a lot of things like link costings and so on and so forth. What it also sets is the default replication time between controllers. A lot of the time you generally bring that down on small installs. You can bring that down to 15 minutes quite happily, and that keeps AD quite happy. So that's the sites and services section primarily, unless you need to do anything more advanced with that. If you are dealing with multiple domains and multiple sites and multiple Active Directories, you may have to play around with domains and trusts, in which case you would be setting within here, where has it gone? Basically you would be adding in forests, and you would be adding in trust between domains. So you would be establishing new trusts with old NT4 domains, all sorts of stuff. But for a beginner session, you really don't want to be playing with that. It does some fun things. Other than that, there's not much else to do with Active Directory at the top level that is kind of worth dealing with. Let's just see how quickly our new machine is up and running. There we go. Let's get in and just get signed in, and we will domain join this one in a second. Just sign in with the super top secret password. No worries. throughout. The other half's just been out with the dog. And then one of the cats decided to go for a walk as well. Let's just flick back over to here while that one's booting up. Now, in my opinion, one of the most powerful parts of Active Directory is group policy, because it allows you to configure clients and how the domain enforces things so incredibly easy. It's something that no other directory system has ever managed to come close to replicating. And it's why Active Directory is still as popular as it is. The Intune system, or endpoint device management in Entra ID, or Azure AD, as it used to be called, is getting there, and it is becoming very, very similar. But group policy is probably one of the main selling points, because it enables you to enforce compliance and standardization across a domain, obviously Windows domain, with Windows clients. Control, lockdown, install, configure any aspect that can be configured via group policy. Now, by default, not all of the latest group policies are installed, so you have to do that manually, but you get two policies set up by default: your default domain policy, and you have a default domain controllers policy, which are different due to the fact that domain controllers have a slightly different security setup than the default domain policy enables. This is probably going to throw a hissy fit, but by default it sets things like your password policy. So you can see here that password history is 24 passwords, and this is applied. Password age. What it doesn't set is an expiration policy. Oh no, sorry, maximum password age, 42 days by default now. So that's from Microsoft. How many invalid login attempts before the user locks themselves out? Logon restrictions, security options. These are a very, very basic set of policies. The first thing I would suggest you look at is the Microsoft baseline security policies. I won't go into that here, but importing the baseline security policies for endpoint clients and for domain controllers, they may be a bit too much for some sites, but they are a good way to get started on locking down to best practice. The other thing, obviously, is you can create policies to do all sorts. I'm going to create a new GPO, and we're going to call this Gym Login Disclaimer. And it might take me a minute to find the exact entry. But what this will do is we will go in and we will edit this policy. Active Directory group policying is split up into two sections. So you have your computer configuration. This is designed so that any settings within here will impact any computer that this policy applies to. And we have user configuration. This covers, again, they may be subtly different options and subtly different policies, because there are certain policies that are, and certain settings that are user defined. There are certain policies which are computer defined. Pretty sure that light just flickered. Any rumbles? Any thunder? No, we're good. Okay. And within each, there are sections and subsections. You will spend most of your time in administrative template policies. And I have to remember where the login disclaimer is. I think it will be on the Windows Components user. Oh, I've got to remember this. It's been a while. Let's have a look. No, I can't remember where it is. If anyone in comments can remember where the logon disclaimer policy is set, it will probably be in a logon section. Check login. Show first sign in animation. No. Where has it gone? Again, there are a lot of configuration, and if you do not have the latest policies, you can get them from Microsoft and pull them in very easily. You can also pull in group policies for Microsoft Office, Google Chrome. A lot of companies have group policy ADMX files for their application. Got to remember which section it's on. No, don't want that section. Sorry, I'm just Googling quickly. Interactive login. Remember local policies. Message, that's it, message text. I'll put this in place. This is a test message. So we'll put that in there. Can't have, oh, that's cruel. Everyone should be allowed marshmallows. Right. Hopefully by now we should be up and running. We are. Excellent. So we'll go yes to that. We'll close that. We will configure this local server. We will give it a name of lab member 1. And while we're renaming it, we will join it to Jim, the IT guy. .com. And it should prompt us, hopefully, for a login. And I will use my admin credentials, because I am a domain admin, which means I have the rights to domain join client machines. Welcome to the domain. We go OK, we go close, and we restart. And we let it boot back up again. And it applies computer settings, and it will apply some domain policies. And we click that, and we do that. We go other user, and it says sign into the domain. And if I sign in as jim.admin again on here, we'll let that sign in and do its thing. I am assuming But if I now refresh this, we will see that I am lab member number 1, which it's updated the relevant section. I will also get in DNS. I look up there, we will see lab member 1 is registered there and is on IP address 120.100. And it has a expiry timestamp of 8 o'clock, which is no, it's a timestamp when it was created. When does it expire? These don't expire by default. We don't need to worry too much about that. That's fine. And if I look in, we can close that. We check group policy management, top level. What I will now go and do is make sure that I move in users and computers, because if I go and look in the default container, we will see lab member 1. I'm just going to show you that, because if I move this into here, because I have the gym login disclaimer, and it applies to anything that is under the domain controller section and the test lab OU. So group policy inheritance, you will see default domain and gym login disclaimer. What it should do, unless I've missed something, is when I restart this computer, because you have to generally restart a machine to make sure that it moves, or it knows that it's moved to the correct organizational unit. It might be because I didn't add a thing, but yeah, it hasn't done it. Hold on. I need to check my group policies, because that's not what it's supposed to do. It is tucked away. That's what I was looking for it a minute ago. Under here. And it should display it, unless I missed a interactive login. Message check user. That's correct. Message title. YouTube test. So that should he says when I reboot it. Shouldn't actually need to reboot now. Let's run the most useful tool when you're playing with group policy on a client machine, which is a GP update. Which will pull the latest group policy off of the domain controller. Like so. Sign back out a second. And there we go. Needed a title. So, yes. Disclaimer messages on login is done via policy. and so is many other things. Don't need to worry about that. Don't need to worry about that. Oh. My musical device decided to do things. Yes, there are a few ways. I mean, depending on what they are using to control their endpoints, there are options for that. Possibly. No, there are others watching. They're just observing and laughing. Listening to my dulcet tones. But that is a server or a client joined to the domain as well. Active Directory as a directory tool is incredibly powerful. It is only recently that cloud-based solutions are getting close to it. But there are still things and there are still systems that rely on Active Directory to work and to be effective. Where's that gone? That was in servers. And it helps it become and be, or it helped it become the de facto standard for directory service management, for managing users, managing computers in a Windows environment. Apple has never had anything as good. Linux is too fragmented for anything like this to ever work properly, because even with LDAP, the different implementations of how everybody does everything mean that what works in one distribution of Linux might not work in another. So it is a very powerful, very flexible, very usable system, but it can be at times infuriating to use when it has a large environment. Welcome. I'm just trying to think of what other basic functions there are. The main thing with it is to stretch it out. Oh no, don't steal my identity. It's not difficult to find. Any ideas why remote desktop will be grayed out? Yes, two things. Number one, it will either be disabled via a policy, so you can disable things like that via a policy, or I believe if you do not have permission to edit that policy. So if you do not have permission to change it, it will grey it out. But which one am I? Yeah, we're not. You can find both of us very easily. For your information, I'm the first one, as we are both listed as directors for our company. And if you look me up on LinkedIn, I'm there as well, so I'm not difficult to find. I'm just trying to think, is there anything else that needs to be covered quickly in this? Not really. once you have a domain controller running, the only next real step is to promote up a second domain controller generally, because you want something available that is going to make sure that if you have a problem with one domain controller, you have something that you can fall back on. Let's do that quickly. It doesn't take long. Yep. I'm old. Into server manager a second. Yep. That is what happens when you run a business. It's why I don't make any secret of it. It's that sort of thing. It's the joy of running a business. So let's add anything like that. If you're a business person, it's not hard to find. Right. Active Directory Domain Services. Next, finish, install. Yes, the internet is a weird and wonderful place. Any advice you give to someone who's opening an IT business? What sort of IT business are you looking at opening? Yeah, you can find all our accounts. You can't find my balance sheets. They're on the line outside. It's not easy, is all I will say. Yeah. Starting an MSP is not easy. If you don't have a good customer base to move with you, it's a struggle. You will not always get every customer. You will not always get everything right. It's difficult at times. It's a lot of work, and it's unfortunately one of those industries now that is seeing a lot of people moving into it, because unfortunately they see figures that are being bandied about, and most of the time those figures are not true. Again, don't be fooled into throwing money at things like marketing agencies, things like that. There's so many. Our accounts are due soon, yes. Yeah, they'll be put in soon. Right, promote this server to be a DC. Add domain controller. So if you're adding a new server, or you don't have to domain join it already, it'll do it for you. But if you want, this shouldn't actually let me do this. This will be an interesting test. Yeah, go find the black box for the internet. Limited service, manage my time clients until I can expand. It's difficult. Because you have to focus, if you're being a managed service provider, you have to manage the services you provide, and that takes time. Do not undersell yourself. It's not worth getting in a race to the bottom. Let's see. So we want to add a domain controller to existing domain. The domain is journeyit.com, which is correct. If I go select, it will tell me what domains are in the area. What it should do, however, is it should come up with an error, because I don't think I have the rights to promote a domain controller. It should give me an error. If I put that... Yeah, again, it's not a simple set it and forget it. So if you the way I kind of morphed into a MSP is I had a good customer base. So start by working out what you can do for them and how much they're willing to pay, because you need a good monthly repetitive recurring income. And that's a lot of the problem. It's great until you've done a load of work for people, and then you've got to deal with waiting for them to pay, and then they and ah as, oh, we don't want that, or we don't need that, or and suddenly the figures that you had all planned out where you're going to be pulling in so much a month go out the window because people don't want to pay that. That's some of the problem. Out of interest, let's let's replicate from there. I don't know if this will work because I'm pretty sure yeah, learn everything, not one thing. It's not an easy thing to morph into, and it's not an easy thing just to spin up. What's the best way to work out pricing for things? You have to put a rough price on your time. Time is essential. Time it costs, well, time costs you money. Now, you also people have to understand that if they ask you to go and price something up, you're spending your time investigating something, so you should be putting a figure on top of the price. Generally, you want to put a markup percentage on all goods. Doesn't matter if someone can go and look something up. What you would do is say, well, I've spent my time looking up a computer specification for you, therefore it would cost me X to buy said computer. I'm going to put 20% on top of X to buy that computer. Now, if you are if you are an MSP or an IT company that services the industry, you will be working with distribution, so you will be able to get the price generally under what a retail price is. So if a computer, for example a Dell laptop is £600 on the website, you might be able to purchase it through distribution for £550. But you then need to work out, if you want to add, say, 10% or 20% markup to that, if that comes out at more than £600, then that's fine, because you would go back and say to them it's going to cost £620. And if they go away and say, well, I can get it here for £620 or £600, it's like, well, that's fine. But if you buy that from them, who's going to install it for you? Who's going to deal with the maintenance? Who's going to deal with any warranty issues? Who's going to deal with dealing with it if you have any problems? It's things like that. That's where you say, you can buy that cheaper, but then it would be oh right, do you want me to come and install and set it up for you? Excellent. So if I'm going to charge you, say, so the laptop is £620 and a half-day installation cost is £150, say. So you put that together, and maybe you say, well, actually, it's going to cost me, or it's going to cost you 650, 620, 720, £780 for me to supply and install that laptop. But if you go off and buy it on your own, it's going to cost you half a day of my time at £250 because I didn't supply the laptop. Therefore, it's going to cost you £820 or £850 to do it the other way. I mean, say two different sort of approaches, so, to a certain degree. So on one hand, you've got, Callum, you're supplying a service. Now you're selling a service to someone with that service. So if you are supplying a bot in Discord, that service has to have an agreed set of terms. It will have an agreed service rate. So you would say it's going to cost you X per month, and for X per month you agree to supply a bot that works and is functional and safe and secure. And you will soon find that you need to work out how much, because although you say these bots are free, they cost you time to write them and to maintain them. And although the hosting as such is free, you need to look at whether, if you're hosting on free infrastructure, is it free for production use? Because the second you start selling, that's production. So you have to be aware that if you're selling something and you're hosting it on an environment that is free for you to trial and test, and then you start selling it, as soon as they get whiff that you're selling stuff or the usage goes up, that you're accessing services, they could cut that off. So you have to factor in the costs of what it would cost if you were paying hosting and things like that. So it has to make itself pay. Again, starting with building the basics, going out and engaging and working out what companies want. Unfortunately, it does take time. It takes the time to understand how companies work, how your clients work, and how to engage with them. It's a free tier on Oracle Cloud. Again, you need to investigate, because a lot of the times the free tiers are free until they're not. And if all of a sudden that free tier becomes a paid for tier or gets taken away, and you've got 100 clients out there all paying you money for a bot, and that bot suddenly stops, they're going to be wanting their money back, or they're going to stop paying you, and suddenly your income stops. Recreate file structure into SharePoint file migration. I'm going to show you. It's a sensible amount, but you need to work out what you need to earn to live. The other thing as well is, when you start doing these things, you need to approach them as individual pieces of work. So you need to speak to them and define this is what we're doing. So we are going to move this folder structure into SharePoint. And at the end of it, you will end up with this outcome. Once you've reached that outcome, that's the project over with. Anything above and beyond, and you need to obviously say, and it will take me X number of days. So you've got the project scoped, and what the starting point is, what the ending point is, what the process is, and how long that's going to take. And at the end of that, you have an outcome. If it's an open-ended thing where, oh, we're going to move that to there and it will take me as long as it would, at some point the company is going to be saying, well, we've thrown all this money at you and we've had no outcome. So you have to deal with that. That is a consultancy side of things, but it gets you experience on how that company works. What you would be looking at from, for example, an MSP side of things is managing the SharePoint and the Office 365 infrastructure, Microsoft 365 infrastructure, and maintaining that and agreeing with them for a monthly fee of X. You will manage, maintain, and administer that environment. So when they have problems, when they need new users setting up, it's all encompassed. No, migrating of a file structure is migrating of it, permissions, everything. It's not just picking the files up and moving them. You need to migrate who has access to what. You need to review. You need to go through and say to them, currently, these people have access. Do these people still need access on the new system? So it's not a straightforward process. There are aspects to it that you need to plan out. And you need to work out how you achieve that. And not only that, you need to provide them with value for what you're doing to demonstrate why they're paying you for that task. When they come up and say, oh, right, okay, well, what we want actually is you're migrating the folder structure from there to there, but while you're doing that, can you also set up a new folder structure for something completely different? That is a different part. That is a different project. Users have their own hard disk space on the server, but no hard disk space is used in the computer. As in roaming profiles. It's not a simple, this is you go to a company, you say pay me X a month and I'll look after everything. You have to know what you're looking after, and you have to have your standards and your agreements set. It can be a very time-consuming thing to get up and running. Look at how the industry is working. Look at the way it's going. Look at how it's working, and try to start to standardize things. Just quickly going back. Aha. Let's ignore that. It did let me. So as a domain admin, I can add a domain controller. Tech doesn't update too fast. You just have to keep an eye on the motion of which direction tech is going, and business will always lag behind. Now, what this should have done automatically is moved, there we go, the member server into domain controllers. Now, this member server is DHCP, which is not difficult. Did you open your company on the side of your day job, or do you have to... I'm myself and my business partner, we formed our company whilst we merged our two consultancies, as it were, into one company. So we migrated. I didn't so much do it alongside my day job. It was already my day job. We just migrated and merged our two consultancies into one company, effectively. We consolidated our client bases. It's very, very difficult, because a lot of the time a lot of obviously MSPs that are up and running have been through the process to get themselves started. It's not something that you can generally just start, like a coffee shop, for example. An MSP isn't something that you can just open a shop and expect to suddenly be turning over a lot of money. It's not that sort of business. There are reasons why a lot of MSPs have quite often grown out of either a couple of companies coming together, or consultancy firms or break-fix firms that have moved into they've morphed into the MSP space. If you are on your own and it's a side thing, I would start with the whole, maybe a few projects, maybe a bit of consultancy, maybe a bit of break fix, and get some experience and get used to how businesses work. It's about taking a system and moving it so you get a company come to you and you're doing break fix work, but you can see that they can do more if you start to push them the right way, and then maybe you look at taking them on as your first managed customer. But by that time you will need to know what security stack you're going to use, what hardware stack you're going to use, having the system set up to do the monthly things, understanding all the business systems that they need to operate, making sure that you set your standards up, so your 365, things like that. It's not a simple just fire it up and away you go and make it up as you go along. You have to already know, all right, I'm going to use that for security, I'm going to use that for my firewall, I'm going to use that for my monitoring, I'm going to use that for my ticketing, I'm going to use that for my email system and things like that. I'm going to use these suppliers for my hardware, I'm going to use this model computer, this model laptop, this model printer, these servers. It takes a lot of time. Right. We have a working domain. Hopefully anyone else who rewatches this by this point will realize that we have a domain, it works. There's not much more I can do without people throwing scenarios really now, but we now have a working domain controller, and we have a secondary domain controller. I think, he says, I think I can flip back to me, and we should be a-okay. I think I will probably wrap it up there. Hopefully this will be useful to people. It's kind of a bit flitty, but it's alive, and we will see what it goes like. I'm probably going to delete those 2 servers now and start installing some clients on that. How do you set up so you can use a thin client and use a remote desktop with a Windows 10 machine? You would need to set up a remote desktop solution or a remote desktop server using either RDS or RDS with VDI. You're more than welcome. That is something that I will probably be setting up anyway, because I need a lot of clients to do some actual hammering of some firewalls. So the actual system that this is running on is the speed testing system. So it will be interesting to see, now that I've got that, I need to add some more disks to it, but I will be spinning up either an RDS solution just to do some testing that way, because it's a bit more real to business. I will save that for another day, because again, RDS requires a few more things, and it requires Active Directory to be in place, and that the setup I've got here isn't how I want it yet. But we will get there with it. So I am going to say that will do for now. I'm going to wind up on here and go and get something to eat because I'm hungry. And then I may end up back on the other distribution and decide to carry on there, or but we shall see. But anyway, I will say thank you all for watching. Thank you for joining in. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for everything else. And I will see you all in another stream, I suppose is the thing. Until next time, goodbye.